I made a king. He just happens to be made of corn. This is King Cornelius Cob. Let's get started. I started with a basic armature and began bulking it out with clay to get the overall shape. At this stage, there's nothing too interesting yet. It's really just about establishing the proportions. He still very much looks like just a piece of corn. Once the base shape was in place, I started working in the kernels. This part takes a while, but it's what really sells the idea of the character. It's repetitive, but there's something kind of satisfying about seeing it slowly come together. For this kind of character, the face is probably the most important part. I like to start with the eyes since they really set the tone for the expression. I wanted him to feel confident, maybe a little too confident. As I added the mustache and goatee, he started to take on a bit of a familiar look. He ended up having a slight Kernal Sanders vibe, which I didn't plan, but it worked out pretty well for the character. At this point, it felt right to give him a crown to really push the idea of him being a king. I started by cutting out a simple crown shape from the clay, keeping the overall design pretty minimal. From there, I added a few small details to make it feel a little more refined. At this stage, I wanted to take a quick look at his stats. For the shoes, I took some inspiration from portraits of Louis XIV. I wanted them to feel a little dramatic and exaggerated, like something a very self-important king would wear. Before all of this, he was just Cornelius, a cob from a small corn village. And while the village itself wasn't anything special, Cornelius always believed that he was. I unfortunately lost some of the earlier footage here, but I focused on building out these large puffy pants. They help exaggerate his silhouette and make him feel a bit more regal. To make them feel a bit more puffy, I rolled out some clay and blended them in to add some wrinkles. For the torso, I layered different pieces of clothing to give him a more complex, royal look. Cornelius had a habit of giving speeches and trying to organize things, even when no one really asked him to. The other villagers didn't take it too seriously, but they didn't stop him either. If anything, they found it kind of endearing. I added a bit of armor here, mostly just for visual interest. It doesn't really feel functional, but it fits the character. For the arms, I kept things fairly simple and focused on building up the sleeves. Adding folds here helps sell the fabric without needing a lot of extra detail. I created a basic shape for the sword and then refined it from there. It's not overly complex, but it adds to the idea that he sees himself as a proper ruler. The cane felt a bit more fitting for him, Adding a corn-shaped handle gave it a little more personality and tied it back to the character. I built up the sheath by wrapping it in a layer of clay to give it some thickness. After that, I added a few small details to make it feel a bit more finished. For the cape, I used a layer of foil to help give it some structure and applied it to the clay with some bacon bond. I attached it to our king and then added a fur trim to make it feel more luxurious. At some point after one of his many speeches, someone jokingly referred to him as Your Majesty. Cornelius didn't realize it was a joke. After a quick bake, I drilled a hole in the side of his pants and attached his sword. For the hands, I started by rolling out a small piece of clay and shaping each of the fingers individually. Then I added in the knuckles and a few extra details to give a bit more structure. It's a slower process, but it really makes a difference in the final pose. With the sculpt finish, it was time to move on to the painting. I started with a black base coat to unify everything. For the face, I started by building up the yellow, which took quite a few layers to fully cover. Once that was in place, I moved on to the eyes, starting with a dark red base and gradually moving to a lighter gray tone. I finished the eyes with a nice husk green, some pupils, and a couple white dots to really give him some life. For the clothing, I started blocking in the main colors for each section to separate all the different layers. I ended up using a mix of purples, reds, and greens to give a more rich, royal look. At this point, the camera started having some focusing issues, which was a little frustrating, but we got through it. For all of the metal elements, I went with gold to really push the royal look. It helps tie everything together and reinforces that over-the-top, self-important feel. To bring out the details, I added some washes using slightly darker versions of the base colors. This helps push the shadows and give everything a bit more depth. After that, I went back in with the original colors along with some lighter tones to add some highlights. This helps bring back some of the brightness and makes the details stand out again. And just like that, King Cornelius Cob was born. He may not rule much, but in his mind, he's exactly what his kingdom needs.